The Star Wars franchise will always be one that looks to push the limits of what is possible with movie-making technology. But as already shown in the previous version of this list, relying on the tool known as CGI in some situations has occasionally led to, well, some quite dreadful visuals in this galaxy far, far away. So I'm Gareth, this is What Culture Star Wars, and here are 10 more of the worst CGI moments in Star Wars. Number 10, a lot during the arena battle, Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. George Lucas evidently wanted to test what CGI was capable of when creating this second prequel, opting to rely on it even more than he did in Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. But it was that gamble which ultimately resulted in some of the film's visuals aging like a pint of blue milk. Not very well. The climactic battle within the Petranaki arena is a prime example of Lucas perhaps getting a little too carried away with his new favourite toy. With so many moving digital parts to keep track of as the Jedi start slicing their way through droids, creatures sprint around the sand, and a bounty hunter tries to pick off a few targets, a number of poorly executed CGI moments derail the otherwise thrilling sequence. You have the sight of a number of extras hilariously swiping their lightsabers at nothing in the background, as the VFX team likely hoped that no one would notice a lack of droid or blaster shot around them. Then you also have the comically weightless Geonosians, and Jango Fett looking like a video game character as he dodged the reek. Also, try not to let out a giggle at the jarring composite of Padme atop a cartoonish beast, as she picks up her beloved Anakin mid-fight. It does not look great. There's obviously a lot to love about this part of the gripping skirmish too, with close-ups of the aforementioned reek and many a droid standing the test of time. They actually look really good, but this ambitious battle of Geonosis is still a scene that highlights the very worst of the prequels, that being an over-reliance on this shiny but inconsistent new digital tool. Number 9, Bouncing Ahsoka. Even with CGI technology hugely improving over the last 2 decades, the minds behind the more recent Star Wars projects still haven't been able to completely nail each and every digital moment they've chucked on screen. Take the first season of Ahsoka, for example. While the CGI is generally of a high standard throughout this search for Ezra Bridger and Grand Admiral Thrawn, the space battles in particular do not disappoint here, that generally impressive digital work made one dodgy moment stick out like a sore thumb, sadly. Watch closely as Ahsoka dives out of her T61974 to take on Balin's skull on Peridia, and, well, something seems a little off. The VFX team have seemingly swapped Rosario Dawson out for a CG Ahsoka as her character hits the ground, before swapping the actor back in again as she rolls. But the digital assistance just leaves Anakin Skywalker's one-time Padawan oddly bouncing off the surface in a way that makes her look like an animated Force user for a moment or two. It was like we were right back in the middle of the Clone Wars series. As YouTube user Bombastic Clips pointed out, perhaps cutting between the moment the actor or their stunt person hopped out of the ship and them landing would have been the wiser, though perhaps more time-consuming, move here. Instead, the creators went the digital route, and fans got a rare case of poor CGI in the otherwise well-made show. What do you want to see in Ahsoka Season 2, folks? You let me know in the comments section down below. Number 8, Here Come the Rathtars, Episode 7, The Force Awakens. Fans rejoiced as the early stages of J.J. Abrams' first sequel picture looked to be embracing the more practical side of special effects, just like the good old days. Along with a ton of beautifully crafted alien inhabitants on the desert world of Jakku, real practical sets were masterfully combined with certain digital elements to create a galaxy that felt far more tangible than the prequels often did. Then they arrived. After Finn and Rey bump into Han Solo and Chewbacca in Episode 7, The Force Awakens, it's soon revealed that the latter duo had been hauling Rathtars across the galaxy. Instead of unleashing a terrifying tentacled creature controlled by talented puppeteers, however, Abrams opted to just lazily have our heroes chased by some rolling balls of crap, rubbery and blurry fury. Now look, they're not the absolute worst CGI monsters ever to try and chow down on one of our heroes, but the many-eyed carnivore still felt like something ripped out of another franchise altogether, like, I don't know, the MCU, and cheaply dropped into this Skywalker saga tale. This returned to far less compelling CGI aliens after seeing some wonderful practical creations in the opening stages, like the Happa Boar, I love that guy, was also a major reason this first action sequence involving Chewie and Han in decades felt like a bit of a letdown in the end too. Number 7, the Sarac Beak, Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. Speaking of unwelcome digitally created monstrosities, George Lucas' special edition tinkering led to an old favourite getting an unnecessary upgrade. After attempting to rescue Han Solo from Jabba the Hutt in Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, Luke Skywalker and pals found themselves on the verge of being fed to the almighty Sarlacc found within the Great Pit of Carcoon. The sight of all those sharp, deadly teeth and tentacles was already enough to leave folks worried about the Jedi and his mate's chances of surviving the deep and dangerous pit of doom. But Lucas did not think that was frightening enough, so he decided to add some additional CG terror. Would George throw in some more jagged teeth, some claws, or possibly even a set of menacing eyes to further spook our heroes? No, not quite. Instead, Lucas gave his Sarlacc a silly-looking digital beak, which was actually its tongue apparently, and some additional tentacles, transforming this somewhat hidden and disturbing monster into something that instantly felt a bit less intimidating. The CGI itself also doesn't quite mesh with the rest of the practical creation either, with the end results just largely distracting from the rest of the rousing sequence. You probably should have just left this one alone. Number 6, The Floating Pair, Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. Oh, you knew it was coming. Returning to the Star Wars project that opted to boldly and sometimes ill-advisedly depend on CG wherever possible, Episode 2, Attack of the Clones saw a young Chosen One show off his strength with the Force to his future wife, somehow being more excruciating than the sound of Anakin Skywalker attempting to flirt with Padme Amidala. This Jedi Padawan floats the weirdest-looking pair you have ever seen across a table in front of her whilst they're enjoying some grub on Naboo. The act itself is sweet enough, pun intended. However, there is never a point there when this clearly CG fruit doesn't feel like the fakest object in the room. With everything from the way it's chopped up by Annie to how Padme picked it out of the sky like a snowflake with her fork, just feeling seriously uncanny. It's a bit uncomfortable, it's weird. Now, the attempt was admirable, sure, but the odd finished effect just didn't pass muster. Would it really have been that hard to just use wires to move a far less weirdly shiny piece of prop food over to the eventual Mrs. Skywalker? Apparently so. And that is why fans were forced to endure another example of George Lucas not knowing when to put the digital wand, or should that be fork, down. Cheers for checking out this list today, you lovely person you. And if you're enjoying this What Culture Star Wars stuff in your life, then hit that subscribe button right now, and you're gonna get more of it popping up all over your screen. Good stuff. Number 5, Leia's Training, Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. With consent from the late, great Carrie Fisher's family, J.J. Abrams and co. were able to use unused footage from Episode 7, The Force Awakens, to bring Leia Organa's story to an emotional end in Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. Now, considering the circumstances, the team did a pretty impressive job when it came to keeping Leia involved in the action set in the present day. However, the same could not be said for her flashback appearance in the film. During a moment which showed Leia training with her brother Luke many years earlier, younger versions of both Mark Hamill and Fisher eventually revealed their faces from underneath their blaster helmets. While Hamill's younger mug actually looked quite convincing as it was lit up by his green lightsaber at night though, Fisher's face wandered into Rogue One as Star Wars story territory again, sadly. Despite using dailies from Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, and Fisher's own daughter, Billy Lord, as a stand-in body double, there was still no getting away from the fact Leia's CG face looked like it belonged in a Star Wars video game here. Number 4, The CG Backgrounds, Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. I promise this will be the last time that this list dunks on Attack of the Clones. Scout's honor, or Padawan's honor, I don't know. Again, while you definitely have to salute George Lucas and his team for the way they experimented with fully CGI backgrounds throughout this second prequel, their boldness wasn't always rewarded with stunning results. Perhaps the most glaring example of a digital background that has aged appallingly can be found during the moment involving Obi-Wan Kenobi, Mace Windu, and Yoda going for a wander through the Jedi Temple within the opening 30 minutes. minutes. The scene felt like the actors had been dropped into an animated movie for a few minutes, with the compositing and lighting during the conversation not quite being up to scratch. Everything from the colours of the carpets to the gigantic pillars just felt incredibly artificial, especially when compared to the far more detailed and impressive miniatures and practical sets used to create Star Wars locations at various points in both the prequel and original trilogies. Spare a thought for the poor performers who spent hours having to pretend they were walking and talking with little green aliens in grand structures too, with nothing but green or blue screens and the odd prop to react to. I'd go mad. Number 3, The Creepy Clones, Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. It's well documented that George Lucas oddly decided to have every single fully suited clone that appeared in the prequels be an entirely digital creation. But while the call was a questionable one, the effect itself was decent enough in Attack of the Clones, and improved further by the time of the final prequel. But then, Commander Cody opted to take his helmet off in Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, and things got a bit weird. With not a single piece of practical armor being made for this film, Lucas instead chose to slap a digital suit onto Mira Morrison for the moment he hands Ewan McGregor's Obi-Wan Kenobi his lightsaber back. This was unquestionably a tough effect to pull off in the early to mid-2000s, and while the effort was definitely commendable, it ultimately just felt all kinds of unnatural as Cody's head weirdly floated around the armor, similarly to Bruce Banner's floating head in Avengers Infinity War. Maybe they should have just left the mask on and saved viewers from being forever haunted by this levitating clone skull, yeah? Number 2, De-aging Anakin and Obi-Wan Kenobi. Now here's something a little bit different. While many of the other entries on this list focus on moments where overindulging in CGI led to cartoonish or jarring visuals, this one will look at a sequence that suffered somewhat due to the opposite. Hopping back in time for a spot of lightsaber training with Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi, the latter's Disney Plus series saw the return of both Hayden Christensen and Ewan McGregor in the famous roles they played throughout the prequels. Both actors were seemingly adjusted slightly via de-aging tech for the engaging back and forth, but just not quite enough in the end, particularly in the case of Christensen. For the most part, this wasn't exactly a big issue, especially as most of the scene involved them swinging lightsabers. You're not really looking at the faces when they're doing that. In those few moments when the camera captures Christensen's face in close-up though, the CG tinkering can't quite mask the fact the actor is noticeably a fair bit older than he was when he shot Episode 2 Attack of the Clones, which was set at a similar time as this scene. Clearly realizing they needed to up their game, the folks working on Ahsoka definitely made Christensen look far more convincing as a younger version of himself during the World Between Worlds sequence. In Obi-Wan Kenobi though, the Force was definitely not strong with the digital de-aging of this actor. Number 1, the Blurg, the Mandalorian. Trying to make a real person sitting on top of a fully digital animal look convincing can be a tough nut to crack, something that was evident during the first season of The Mandalorian. Now, it must be said that the majority of the digital effects present in these first few episodes of Mando Fun are solid to tremendous, especially for a TV show. A show with a $100 million budget, admittedly, but that's still smaller than your average modern-day Star Wars blockbuster. Though that smaller budget wasn't really felt all that much when Din Djarin was interacting with a cute little puppet Grogu or fighting off stormtroopers, it sadly was during the moment when the titular Mandalorian hopped on the aforementioned Blurg. Feeling like one of the many pointless creatures George Lucas stuffed into his original trilogy over the years, this alien, first seen in Ewoks The Battle of Endor, was one of the few low points in an otherwise strong first season. Now, the VFX team evidently went to great lengths to bring the Blurgs back into the galaxy far, far away, even throwing Pedro Pascal and stunt doubles onto a book for the moment when he tries to hop onto one. The digital Blurg was then added in later, you see. It's a shame then that outside of the odd impressive close-up, admittedly, the CGI Blurgs drag down the majority of the scenes they're in, especially the ones where they're seen going for a weightless run. Oh my god. Yep, was not pretty, but we still got Grogu, so everything's fine.